I think we're live now, uh, and I think everyone can hear me. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Anand. I run the Samana podcast, where we speak with visionaries about the principles that guide them and the frameworks that create both impactful and meaningful careers. A little bit about me. After undergrad at the University of Western Ontario, I worked in corporate finance, did my MBA at Kellogg, and later joined Bain full time. After Bain, I noticed that smart people were always sprinting towards the next role without a strong why or a 10 or 20-year picture they were working towards. I realized that you could only develop that vision through valuable conversations with amazing mentors, but the honest ones about career and life trade offs aren't always public. I jumped to my own wealth firm to support high impact people in their careers with the financial piece, but I also wanted to create a public space for these meaningful conversations. Samana is where ambitious people step back from picking what's next just because it's been done, and we really examine the choices that shape a life. The goal is learning how to build not just an impressive career, but a meaningful one. Here's how today will work. We'll spend about 25 minutes hearing our guest story and then open it up for a live Q&A, both from the questions you've submitted when you registered and new ones that you can send in through the link you'll see here. And you should see a link appear just momentarily. I think it's right here. You might be able to see it. And if you're on the Riverside platform and not watching on YouTube, you'll be able to click this Q&A link down here and be able to submit your questions directly. I'll give it a moment just so that you can pop it up on your screens. And I think that should be enough time. I think we've probably all got people clicking this link. And now I couldn't be more excited to introduce today's guest, Dick Boyce. Dick, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I've been really looking forward to this, not just because of your track record, which is remarkable, but because you bring a unique openness to how you reflect on your own journey. For the audience, Dick has seen it all, from his early days as a partner at Bain& Company to senior leadership at PepsiCo, and then as CEO of J.Crew, and later as chairman at Burger King and Del Monte. He founded and led the operating group at TPG, guiding performance across more than 100 companies and over $140 billion in revenue. He also today serves on the board of Allbirds and has advised CEOs directly of organizations like HP. Today, we'll explore both the story that people see, which is your career, and the story that people don't, what it actually felt like to live it. Well, thanks for joining us today, Dick.
Great to be here.
Perfect. So, Dick, just wanted to, I'm going to start a little bit earlier in your journey, in your career, and I want to take you right back to the beginning. You stayed at Bain for more than a decade, which is rare today. I wanted to understand from your perspective, was staying at Bain driven by the work, the people, the pace of growth? And for younger consultants who might feel pressure to jump after 2 or 3 years, what do you think they miss if they leave too early?
Well, first, this will probably be a series of several self-deprecating comments. A little bit of it was inertia. I really enjoyed the place. I enjoyed the level of work. I can't speak how Bain is like now, but it really satisfied a pretty deep ADD element of my life. So to be able to work on different problems at the same time and feel like you're smart enough, which you not always were, to jump from industry to function in the same week was very intellectually stimulating, and I never really got tired of it. It's sort of addictive to get on to the next problem and figure out how we could solve it. But I also work with some great people. I mean, at the time I started, we just opened the California office. And so Meg Whitman, who ended up building eBay from scratch, or Mayo Shattuck, who was became the chairman of all Exelon. Scott Cook sat right next to me. He left and founded Intuit. So, and there were only 15 of us at the start. So everyone was doing some pretty remarkable stuff and on their way to great stuff. So I think that's what kept me longer. The Bain actually went through a bit of reorganization in the late 80s when an ESOP was done by the founders that sort of was very disruptive and led all of us to sort of rethink, do I want to have on my epitaph a Dick Boyce, great consultant at Bain for 30 years? And I sort of knew that wasn't going to be the epitaph. And that's when I started saying, I want to get on to the next thing. I've had a great run. And a lot of folks had decided the same. from my era. Quite a group of us stayed about 8 to 10 years.
That's quite incredible. And in order for you to have also stayed that long, I think obviously the people were a big part of it. You must have had some really great mentors while you were at Bain. I think there was some. I think you must have met Bill Bain at the time that you had joined. I believe he was still around then.
Yes, it was a small summer program in those days. So Bill literally, if you played tennis at all, I probably shouldn't have said that I did, but I did. And so you played tennis. It was sort of a rite of passage. I think there were 5 or 6 of us, and all of us played tennis. Now, 3 of them played in college, which I didn't remotely do. And it was interesting. If I got a mentoring from Bill, it was once he figured out I had no backhand, he hammered me, and I went from being in the tie in the set to being shut out in the next set. I sort of respected that he just figured out the weak spot and went after it. I would say also I couldn't imagine. I had been a salesperson right after college, and I felt I had learned a lot about how to sell. But Bill Bain was just at another level of thinking creatively about what the consumer's problem was and what we offered them. And he was very good about planting seeds for the long term. When there was a dead end, it wasn't, okay, I'm done here. It was, well, let's talk about this. Let's keep in touch on this issue. So he got me to think differently for sure about selling. I would say in my era, and I can't imagine I'm sure it's much, much different now. There was no HR, there was no talent management, there was no corporate, there was no development. Either you were getting the work done or you left. There was no one, no coaching at all, honestly. We did have some outside firm work on our culture because the culture was a little bit rough back in those days. And I can even remember now we had some great mantras like accept the 1% possibility, which literally stood for, okay, all you jerks, you think you're perfect 100% of the time. Just try this. Assume you're right 99% of the time. Open your mind to that 1% where you might be wrong, especially when you're interacting with others. It was sort of a good observation because we had a bit of a culture that was sometimes wrong, never in doubt. And we learned a little bit better about having some doubt and that others might have a different view than you did. But beyond that, it was a little bit the Wild West in the late 70s, early 80s when I was there.
Who were the people that made the most profound impact in your career while you were there?
Um, I'd say there was a one of the founders, and he actually came he wasn't an actual founder. He's one of the first hires. Was at the time an unknown guy named Mitt Romney, and Mitt Romney ran recruiting for Bain. So that's how I met him. He made me my first offer out of business school. You can imagine the caliber that he is now. He was the same caliber then. So he was only 33 or 4. I was like 25. And I just couldn't believe how organized he was, how articulate, how fun he was, but then how serious he could be, how substantive he was. And I worked with him on and off for about a decade. That certainly was part of the glue of Bain, was that connection with Mitt, because he had such high integrity. And there were 2 or 3 times I can remember once, and again, can't speak to how Bain is today, but in those days, it was very common to have quote slides to embellish the work. Like we could say, costs are really high at the plant. Here's all the analysis. But then we have the plant manager saying, boy, we never really paid attention to costs. Or a plant manager saying, we always are trying the next new thing and we never really got costs on board. Or, gee, I never even went to a second shift. We really could. So those were all the quotes that sort of embellished. In one instance, a guy used bad language, quoting a plant manager, something along the lines of, I would say, like, sometimes we just don't know what the shit we're doing here. And Mitt Romney says, that guy didn't say that. And then the Bain guy, his employee in front of the client said, no, he did. And Mitt goes, he's in the church with me. He's a Mormon. He doesn't use that language. And of course, that sort of killed the meeting. Mitt confronted the guy. The guy admitted he probably had manufactured that a bit. And it turned out that happened more than a few times. And Mitt ended the use of quote slides.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was really special. He didn't say this is an exception. He said, you know what? We're just an analytical firm. We don't go off quotes from people that you can manufacture. So it was a pretty interesting just aha moment for me that he would take something that had become culturally how we message things, was take active quotes from clients on problems we were solving. And he just eliminated that. And there are many other examples, but that was probably the best example where I really thought about how black and white he is in a good way about right and wrong. So that's probably the one I would pick. I mean, Scott Cook, I would say, who ultimately founded Intuit. I learned a lot about how you can be honestly introverted and quiet and be incredibly effective. Scott was one of the ones that if he talked, everyone stopped, because he hardly ever did. And when he did, it always made sense. and he stays that way today. He is a very humble person. I think a lot about, if you have two great attributes, is being curious and being humble. And Scott Cook epitomizes that to this day, and this is now 40 years later.
It's true, and you still see the same qualities that you're describing from years ago in those people today, which is truly incredible. And and the slides on the quotes, I think those came back because I did a lot of those quote slides, perhaps not from the client directly, but during our PE due diligences, there were a lot of experts that we had quotes from. Truly incredible. And this next question is going to be a bit of a two-parter. I'm gonna ask you the first part of this question, which is what personally helped you get to the partner level at Bain, and not just the partner level, but to go to senior partner. And one of the questions that we've had from the audiences was, how do you sort of create that narrative to get to the partner level, both internally and externally?
Well, first we have to recalibrate, from prehistoric times to the Neolithic or wherever we are today. But uh, I would say, in addition to being very smart and working very hard, it did help that we were doubling in size every year. So I made partner in my fifth year. I don't know what it takes now, but I have a feeling it doesn't happen in 5 years. So if you were doing your work and keeping your head down, our office went from, I joined, there were about 8 or 9 of us in California. It went to 18, it went to 36. Within 3 or 4 years, we had 100 people probably in 5 or 6 years. And so there was, if you're doing the job, you were going to get promoted. There's just a lot of room. So I think that, honestly, I would say the first thing is being organizations are growing rapidly. And I remember looking at the accounting firms with some of my friends were, and the path to partner was well documented, and it was like literally twice as much. It was about 10 years, but that's because they were growing at 5% a year. So
Mhm.
I think growth made a big difference. Certainly, we had a little bit of a mantra within TPG that, I'm sorry, within Bain, that if you can solve problems, you can stay here. If you can solve problems and sell the next piece of work that's an extension of that, you can be a manager here. And if you can sell somebody totally new, so they don't really know you, and you're just making a case for Bain, you're framing the problem right away, you're building a relationship that was cold. That's sort of being a partner. So we did sort of have that mindset. And interesting enough, as you heard me describe, at all related to how well you can interact with a client to make the firm bigger. Different stages of that. Solve current problem, solve new related problem, solve a completely new different problem with a different client. And sometimes the best way you did that is through reference. I mean, Bain was maniacal about word of mouth. We didn't do any advertising or promotion, of course, in those days. So the person who really got to partner was someone who built enough relationships at the right level in his clients that they would go out of their way to tell one of their peers on a board or peers in another company to, you got to check out what these guys do. And we always would do like a 1 month diagnostic at no cost. And we almost always could identify opportunity. And that's how we grew. And the folks who were best at making that transition from managing a team to bring the new clients became partner. It may still be true today to some degree, but you could tell me.
No, that's true. I mean, is obviously, I think very rarely do people get to the partner stage at 5 years today, but there is a path to getting there when you're in your early 30s, early to mid 30s, if you start early enough. Um, and you know what? After your partner track, what's really interesting is that you were there for a number of years and then you decided to switch to more of an operating role. And I'm going to jump here a little bit because I wanted to get some guidance on your path here. So your next step, responsibility ramped up significantly when you were picked for J. Crew after TPG.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
what was it about that moment and the way that you were working that made people trust you with so much more responsibility? I remember J. Crew at that time was going through a bit of a turbulent time, and the
Mm-hmm.
person they picked to turn that around, was somebody who was going to both help on the business side and the cultural side of the business. So could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, this was a little bit of serendipity, and maybe that's part of the story that you can't always map things out exactly as you want. I was running a Pepsi bottling at the time. Two of the three founders at TPG were from Bain and knew me. Both had worked for me at different times. And they said, we're looking at a consumer goods company in New York. It's right down the street. It's called J. Crew. I knew J. Crew, obviously. And we'd able to look at it with us. So actually just nights and evenings. And I suggest this to everyone. It's a great way to broaden your network at no cost and learn as well. Others guys started doing this as well. I just was available to do diligence. So it wasn't like an assignment because I was working at Pepsi, but I did it nights and weekends, and I understood consumer goods. I understood the consumer. I understood the supply chain and so forth because I was running all operations at Pepsi and Pepsi Cola. And myself and the lead deal guy recommended to the investment committee. That was fun for me to be in an investment committee for a company that I don't even work for as an advisor, recommending to do a deal. It was about a $500 million sales company at the time. That the check was around 125 million, which is fairly good size for TPG. It was the very beginning of our second fund, I think, or was the tail end of the first fund, actually. Anyway, we had quite a list of people to become CEO. The chairman, founder, operating person was leaving. His daughter, who really did create the business, was staying. She was going to be head of design, product, merchandising, a huge job, but we didn't have a CEO. And honestly, it became, we were close to the financing close. We did not have a CEO. She was a challenging person to work for, talented, but had some elements of a lot of founders, eccentric, hard to work with. And so they asked me if I would be the CEO, which was completely out of the blue, frankly. I wasn't in the running. I was helping in the search, but I wasn't driving the search. And I felt like Woody Allen in that movie where he's in the hospital, his first child is being born, and the doctor turns to him and says, you want to cut the umbilical cord? And Woody Allen says, isn't there someone here more qualified to do this? But I took it on. So it was a huge leap. It was very exciting to be in the middle of a brand that I loved, with a group of people that were very receptive to having I'll call myself a professional manager versus the founder world, which was pretty idiosyncratic, just putting in basic processes, having well-planned meetings, having KPIs that people could be held accountable for, having a bonus system that was transparent. These are sort of fun, obvious things that I sort of knew. This is boom, 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 boom. They didn't do any of those things. So it really was a fun thing to do. And a really interesting thing in the culture, I mean, a quick sidebar, there was a bat phone in the office that only the founder, Emily, could pick up. It was a red phone, like in a movie, and immediately paged the entire 500 people at headquarters. And she could say, Sally, get up here right now. And, everyone would freeze. Sally runs up there and she says, see this jacket? That button is not supposed to be here. This is a no button jacket. And then she'd shoo her away. I watched this a few times, and I was there in part to help Emily get better. And I said, why do you think she keeps coming up here? And she was indifferent to my advice, honestly, to be frank. And she said, I don't know why. I said, well, because you didn't explain why the button doesn't go there. So if you spend more time on the why, you'll have to be yelling at them later. But she never really connected on that. Ultimately, I hired Mickey Drexler, the king, the merchant prince of the Gap, to take my job and run J. Crew. First day he shows up, he says, what's the bat phone for? I described, he says, get rid of that. I'm not going to yell at people on the phone. But literally, Mickey comes back the next morning. This is how you got a great way to think about culture. Sometimes it's little things. He picks up the phone. He goes, hey, Sally, she's here from the St. Louis store. They were #1 last month. Comp store growth of 14%. Let's hear it for Sally. And people freaked out. 500 people have never heard anything positive over the bat phone. And all of a sudden, Mickey said, hey, let's celebrate. We got some star here in our midst. And then every week he was saying something good about someone in the company. I mean, as much as I had an influence on making the company more professional, Mickey just zinged it with that and said, hey, we're going to use this phone and celebrate. It's a small thing, but it was a fun thing. And it really set the culture on a much better path. So that was my experience. I was quite fortunate. I was right place, right time, and it worked out well. And I was able to succeed myself with a rock star, which is one of the more important things you do if you have a bit of a track record, is who replaces you. And you leave the company in better hands than when you came into it.
That's phenomenal.
We made 9.5 times our money. Can't miss saying that.
and
over about 8 years. It took 8 years, so lower IRR, but pretty darn good in multiple amounts.
And you know what? You've had in a different interview, you mentioned that obviously you were CEO of J. Crew, but you also enjoyed working with CEOs and making them look like superstars. Can you talk to me a little bit about the contrast between those mindsets? What's the kind of mindset that helps you become a great CEO versus a CEO maker?
So I have to take issue. It doesn't sound like me to say make them look like superstars, because it sounds. I think I'd like to be in the neighborhood where people would say, I don't know what it is about Boyce, but we seem to make better decisions when he's here, or something like that. I'm fine with that kind of characterization. But I had quite a lot of the fun that really was fun for me is I didn't want to be king. I didn't want to be the CEO. And some private equity firms said the guy like me comes in and pretty soon the CEO feels like he's getting squashed. Hey, Boyce is chairman, but he's calling my people all the time. He's here every week. That's not. So my whole MO was to work behind the scenes and help him get stuff done or her get stuff done. And oftentimes they directed me to a more public role in the company to solve a specific problem. When we were restructuring Burger King, I got very involved in the part of restructuring about 2,000 contracts over 8,000 of our system in the US. And it just was a complete distraction for the CO. I knew how to do it. I knew how to work with the lawyers and the finance guys and to accelerate it. So I would step into those kinds of things, but generally speaking, and I think it does bodes well for everyone. If you help by being around, helping others around you succeed, it always helps you. It just does. There's a payback, pay it forward principle. It seems to always work, and it's always been helpful to me. No CEO ever felt I was trying to take their glory or take their credit. I was there to try to help them. And you have
Absolutely.
to be careful because sometimes it sounds like the government. Hi, I'm from TPG. We're here to help.
Right.
You got to be smarter about it than that. But eventually, you find ways to help them get stuff done. And in some cases, like when I worked at Hewlett Packard, I was Meg's right hand person, and I was sort of the buffer between her and the division presidents because I knew her, I knew how to work with her, and I could help them succeed just because I knew what really appealed to her and getting work done, and stylistically it would work best.
And you're right, tiptoeing that line between, not being overly imposing on the people who are reporting to the CEO, and trying to become the CEO yourself. This J Crew opportunity for you came through, I would say, relationships. Could you talk to me a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about what building relationships with people, with mentors, early in your career, what did that look like? What mattered most? Are there any habits or approaches that you
Mm-hmm.
recommend people do now that may pay off years later?
I would say, and I don't like this word intentional because it's such a thing. I'm intentional about this, that, but not using that word. I very took seriously networking all the time, and that
Hmm.
goes back to being a kid in the playground, being the captain to get the kickball team organized. I just loved doing that, and I always found good reasons to stay connected to people. Often because I just spot something interesting and I pass it on. I've just been that way, sort of a lucky thing because I just like doing that. But I would say today you can't survive without having a great network. And I guess I'll say it in this way. I found probably the most important thing I did at companies. I was rarely the smartest person, but I was always the person who was the intellectual clearinghouse. I knew where the problem could be solved. I knew either who or what could get to an answer very, very quickly, who was expert on it. And I sort of prided myself on someone saying, we've got this real problem in Asia with our car dealership company. I said, gee, I know a really good guy who used to own a car dealership. He sold it. He's now on a board of a supplier to the car industry, and he speaks Mandarin and he's English educated. Boom. I mean, that's like getting right down to the bullseye. And I try to do that all the time. And and by the way, you can't do that if you focus on Facebook, or some other people say the number of friends there truly can be friends is some number
Yeah.
between 150 and 200 or something like
Hmm.
that. And we all have that number. But what you really have to think about, and people have studied this, is the weak links are the most important part of your context. I found this job at Pepsi not from a good friend, but a somewhat distant person who was connected to me, who heard about a job that fit perfectly for me, and a friend of a friend had told him I was looking for that kind of job. So I'd keep that in mind. A lot of you, if you can do the math, if you have 1,000 direct connections and you have 1,000 from each of them, I think that number gets to 1,000,000 right away. Well, the vast majority of those you hardly know who they are, but you have a very credible weak link that you have someone who knows someone. I tap into it all the time. I still go on LinkedIn to find solutions. I've just got involved in a really fun golf equipment company. We're trying to fill out some of the spots, and bang, 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 I've got some very nice ideas, none of whom I know personally, reaching
Hmm.
out to people to people who I'm connected to. So I can't say enough about it. I think networking is a superpower that I would dive and be better at than other people.
That's fantastic. And I think, a lot of us struggle with that today because you have LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and you're superficially connected and superficially liking things, but you never really get to know somebody until you sit down and you have a conversation with them. There's a few different themes that you mentioned over the span of our conversation so far. One, which is being the right hand to a CEO, one of which is being a CEO. And then the third thing, which I think a role that you've played, is you essentially built a new company inside of TPG. So you're effectively a founder at that point. What kind of skill sets do you feel like that were needed to do that? And as somebody who's young, how would they think about developing the skills and the muscle to be able to do something like that?
So first start by think a little about your risk profile, because if you're set and comfortable at Bain, it is hard to go do something differently. And I was set and comfortable at Pepsi, but I was still one of maybe 15 people who could run PepsiCo. That I didn't like the odds of that. Everyone else had much longer tenure than I did, so I was open minded to look at other things. When TPG called me, it was to do operating work. In the first example, obviously, like J. Crew, and then over time, maybe build out a group. But and I think a lot of you get the dynamics between the investing side and the operating side. Some private equity firms are investors only. Some have operators, but they're sort of a second class citizen, honestly. And I didn't want that set up. So I proposed and they agreed that I would form a consulting company. It's actually named after the Olympic credo, Cedius Altius Fortius, CAF, which is higher, faster, stronger. And I hired a handful of guys, and we had a 2-year gig to prove not just to the founders who already knew I could do work, but to the other deal guys to make me part of the partnership and have us be part of the promote. Because right, historically, you were outside the promote. The companies that were bought were sort of required to pay you, and there was no real equity involved. I just thought it was worth the effort, so I did that. Ended up having a couple of good successes early with J. Crew and Del Monte, and then I formally joined TPG's partnership, as did the people in my group. And then I had the green light as we grew. And I mentioned that before. If we had stayed as one fund, I would have had 5 guys. We ended up 5, 6, 7, 8 funds, and I had 60, 70 guys, plus a whole other group of advisors that were part-time paid. And it was an ecosystem that basically we built out across every function, every industry, and across every geography. Now, a lot of people had a multi-process and do more than one of those boxes, but we were pretty intentional about making sure that any deal that popped up around the world in the verticals of interest to us, that any functional element, whether it was a Salesforce issue or a manufacturing issue or a social media presence issue, that we had people who could dive in. So I prided myself on building it out over time, over a long period of time, to get it right.
That's phenomenal. And getting people aligned is hard enough with your own team. How did you also manage to get buy-in from people above you, around you? What is your advice on inspiring almost upwards and not downwards?
I think some of the stuff will just sound common sense, but it's easier said than done. I always thought about my boss's problem. And the logic you can sort of think is, let's say I figured out that the plants, manufacturing plants, are high cost at Pepsi. I can go to the boss, the SVP of all operations, and say, I've really done some work and benchmarked, and the plants are really high cost. And if you're like a mid-level manager, he might say, okay, great. But then he has to go figure out, well, what are we going to do about it? And he's got to ultimately get to his boss. Well, his boss actually really wants the company to be growing faster and is not totally focused on cutting costs in the plants. But I would always think that way. So I know the main focus of the CEO of all Pepsi is growth. Well, one of our limits to growth is our capital. We're capital constrained on manufacturing, and the high cost problem is because we are underutilized. So I would make the whole leap from, if we get better utilization, like you don't want to run around the hallway and say, I can get better utilization for our plants. And a culture like Pepsi, so what? We want to sell more Pepsi. But if I could run by and say, I can increase our production capacity by 30% without a new CapEx dollar. Wow, we could grow 30% and not have to build a plant. So I'm giving a real life example. We ended up not building bottling plants for the next several years because we weren't running on 2 shifts. Our preventive maintenance was too low. Therefore, our unscheduled downtime was too high. Our setup times were easily fixable. Our run lengths were too short. I applied a whole lean process across 50 plants nationally. But the noble cause was, I pointed toward, we can get much more growth with less capital. That's the noble cause. And I was thinking about my boss's problem. Now, by the way, you asked me sort of a setup question. I'm not that clever, but that's, if I had to capsulize it,
Yeah.
a way to win is always thinking above what when you dump something you're so proud of on your boss's desk, what does he actually have to do when you walk out the door? Because you feel, I figured out the cost problem, but that's not the ultimate problem. It's
That's
how do
right.
we grow? How do we grow with less capital?
Mm-hmm.
So have those things in your head. I think you do well. Obviously, just being a nice person. I mean, you can be direct and be tough, but be nice. People want to work with people that they want to be around. They don't want to. If you're in a situation where you're running a staff meeting and people aren't looking forward to it, you better look in the mirror, because it can't be. It's got to be Monday morning. I want to check in with Boyce. I want to hear what we're up to. I want to see
Mm-hmm.
what new things are coming down the pike. I might get some credit for something I just pulled off. I might get some help. I'm always asking people where they need help. I spend a lot less time on defining a problem and asking more about what help do you need to get it done.
That's phenomenal. And actually, I'm gonna park that thought there because there is an audience question that I wanted to ask you as an extension of that thought. But before we dive into the audience Q&A, you've got a poster of Lost on a Mountain in Maine staring at me in the back, and I would love to sort of dive quickly into
Okay,
that
like
before
this.
we go into the audience
Sure.
Q&A. You've redefined success a couple times in your life, and the most radical shift is going from business to Hollywood. How did
Mm-hmm.
that project come together, and what did it mean to you personally to sort of see that vision come to life? And also, an extension of the networking piece is, how did you get connected with Sylvester Stallone in that process?
First, the high level takeaway is don't be afraid to try something new, and particularly don't get as old as me before you get out of the box. I was pretty old when I drove this, but I had the idea when I was probably a lot of the ages of people out there. Back in 1990, well, in 1939, a young boy got lost on a remote mountain in Maine, and there was a great story about a failed attempt to rescue him by hundreds of people in town, and then he was gone forever. Tragic
Mhm.
story at that time. My dad was inspired by this book about this tragedy and also the outcome, which I'm not giving away quite yet. And he read the book to me in the 60s. In the 90s, I had young kids. We moved to the town where that boy was from. I see the book. I get totally fired up and I find the boy. The answer is he did survive. He survived 9 days in the wilderness. He hiked 75 miles through the Maine wilderness to get back to civilization. No food, no shelter, near death. It's an amazing story of grit and family and faith. And on the way to driving over his house to thank him for inspiring me, I'll tell you, something clicked. Anyone who knows me would say, Dick Boyce, life bingo card, making a movie is not, no one had that bad. Um, but I got totally fired up. And by the time I got to him, I said, I'd love to make a movie with you. Such an inspirational story to me and my family. And he said, I'd love to do it, but he sold the rights in perpetuity. Short version, I could not. I went to the owner, wouldn't sell to me. This is 1993. Gave it up for almost 20 years. I retired, packing boxes. I see the book, and I believe, oh God, the movie must have been made. I can't find it anywhere. I find two guys who have a Facebook page trying to raise money. That's the story. I tracked them down. I climbed the mountain with them twice. Just like in the movie, persuaded them that though they had the rights, if I was to put money in, they weren't going to be the screenwriter or the director. Ultimately, Hollywood convinced them of that. And then a weak link. I knew some guys from CAA from years earlier. I did not know their finance film guy, but I got introduced to him. I made the pitch to him. He connected me to an independent director. I walked in. I pitched making the movie to the guy. This guy's name is Braden. And I did not do enough homework on Braden, but I said to Braden, here's the movie, blah, blah, blah. And after he says, you know, Braden. So that's this guy's name. He goes into the third person like, we've been wanting to make movies about what fucking man can endure for decades. Never did one about what a kid can endure. This is that movie. So that's Stallone. Sorry for the lame
Phenomenal.
impersonation. So I got again, lucky. Stallone loved grit, family, and faith. And this movie had it in spades. And it's the first time he did, I think, a PG movie. So it's available to everybody. And then another thing, sort of a loose, one of these, I'll say, weak connections. I knew someone in the film industry who knew some at Angel Studios, which is a breakout studio I've invested in actually at early stage. And they already had their lineup for the year for streaming, except for one gap. And by luck, I looked at their IPO documents and saw that the gap was the week after my film was out of the theaters. I called them because they only do streaming if they've already put your movie in theaters. They'd never broken that rule. I just made a case. Hey, I see you have a gap in December. I did pass your hurdle rate in terms of I had a 90% Rotten Tomatoes. The hurdle rate was like 85%. Think about streaming some movies that pass your hurdle, even if you haven't put them in theaters. And they molded around and came back and said, we're going to do it. So my movie there, Lost on a Mountain in Maine, was their first test. Now they do it all the time, and they sort of give credit to this conversation we had. So I got some luck involved there. And then Stallone made the movie because then we got a great screenwriter, great producer, great cast, great PR from it. It turned out well. We were number I mean, this is a little indie movie that we were number 5 in the world on Netflix this past summer, a million views a night. So far beyond whatever thought. And I will say, there's some these conversations I've talked about legacy. The legacy element for me is I named my production company Mom and Dad Production for my mom and dad. And Mom stood for Mountains of Maine, and Dad stood for Don's Awesome Deed. The boy's name was Don. And at the very end of the movie, if any of you watch it, you can get it on almost any streaming service except Netflix in the U.S. because they do crappy deals for you. You'll see the very end. I do a testimonial to my mom and dad, which made the whole thing worthwhile to me.
That's beautiful, and I have to tell you, phenomenal impression of Stallone. couldn't tell you it wasn't him. Perfect. So actually, what we're gonna do is we've been getting a ton of great questions from the audience as we've been having this conversation. I'm gonna dive a little bit into these. They're kind of all over the place from people in different parts of their career. So apologies in advance if we jump back and forth. I don't have the time to thematically group them. But the first question that popped up was actually, what are some of the best reads or media you'd recommend for younger, ambitious people who really want to make an impact in the world?
I often do recommend books, but they may not be business books. I mean, there's some great ones that if you're working early stage stuff, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, I think, or 0 to N, I think is a good one. The couple of Jim Collins books on, again, building businesses, Good to Great. They may sound trite, but they're still, I think, quite good ones. I think there's a new book that really helps you set a global frame. If you like a global framework, a Breakneck, fairly new book out. It's describing basically why China and the United States look at every problem differently, because the Politburo is almost entirely engineers who build things and want to be unconstrained. And America's Congress, which is almost entirely lawyers, which tend to almost look for ways to slow or force permitting and appeals on things. It's a very interesting dynamic to understand what's going on with those two countries. I'd say in the personal level, a topic that is a very tricky one to talk about faith. There's a phenomenal book called The Miracle of Man, I would suggest, which makes a very strong case for intelligent design without putting it in your face. He never says, therefore, you have to believe this about faith or not. He just makes a compelling fact-based case that helps you really understand, at least for me, how to think about why we got where we are in a very scientific way. I think one of the big issues of our time, I think a lot of people are missing the real facts. I would read Unsettled by Coonan, which goes through all the unsettled facts of global warming. And I'd read Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. He makes the moral case for fossil fuels. I'm not going to get on that podium right now, but I think it's good to hear the other side of some of these things from younger people I talk to. There's sort of one set of facts. And I think there's a famous book called Inconvenient Truth. I would suggest reading more other books, then you'll learn some inconvenient facts. I'll stop
Absolutely.
there. That's sort of my list, a broad-based list recently.
No, that's great because I think a lot of people who are younger, they'll tend to gravitate towards the business books, but I think it's important to have a very multi-dimensional, not just personality, but perspectives on things. So that's great. Somebody had asked, you moved from an advisory role at Bain to more of an operating role at Pepsi and TPG. What skills or mindsets made you successful in the advisory role that didn't quite translate into the operating or investment role? And what did you have to develop instead for that?
I highlight two things. One, when I first showed up at Pepsi, as you might expect any Bain person, they actually had three simple things. Does he get the right answer in the year-end reviews? Does he bring others with him? And does he do it in the right way? Do it in the right way means that you include people that have different backgrounds who need support to be successful. Do you really make time for that group? Bring others with you. Does the whole organization follow you? And then the thing on top is you get the right answer. My first review was, Dick, you're off the charts, upper 1% on getting the right answer. You are bottom quartile on bringing others with you. And this was like a stunner for me. I'm like, I mean, that can't be right. I'm very persuasive. I do this stuff for a living. Well, no, I'm very persuasive with a CEO. Very few of the work I did at TPG, at Bain, was persuading deep in the organization, getting something done. I mean, the epiphany for me was BCG did this great study for me at Pepsi, identifying the amount of information that if we had better, we could make much, much better use of our 50 operating plants that reported to me and our 250 warehouses. It was going to be an inventory optimization plan. And there's a great recommendation. It sort of showed us that we're loading too much on the trucks every day because we're going for 99% stock out. You've just dropped to like a 98% or 97% stock out. The OQ model will show you're going to save a ton of inventory. And they handed it on my desk. And I thought I was the real operating type guy. They handed it on my desk. What do I have to spend? I have to spend, can I do a prompt? I have to spend the next year building this. We had no hardware device to provide the data real time to our sales force. Our sales force was 15,000 guys driving trucks. So we got a AMD 412 processor. We had to have the hardware built by NORAD. I had to find a software company in Toronto, all places, to write the software. Then we had to train 15,000 people to use a device they don't even want to use. And the whole point was to track inventory at every store in America so we knew what the next load should be. And I'm doing a trial run. He doesn't know that I'm the COO with a truck driver. He's in the truck bed and he's entering the data for the store. And he doesn't even know who I am other than some guy from corporate. I said, why are you entering the inventory data now? It says, oh, you have to enter the inventory data to get their order. I go, yeah, but you're not in the store. So how are you entering the inventory? Oh, I'm just making it up. Holy smokes, we've done all this work. And they're just bypassing the whole freaking thing. So we had to put in a check and a balance so that you actually entered it on the phone. Then we have a docking station. Point is, it took me a year of work to take what I would have thought when I was at Bain, a perfectly teed up recommendation, to actually implement it. And in fact, the implementation time, I looked at this the other day, it took from March of 96 to April of 97, a year. Oh, wow. It took 13 months to roll this out because you have to try it in really hot climates where it turns out it melted if the system fried. Yeah. If you left it on the truck hood. If you're in Detroit in the winter, the system crashed if it got below 10 degrees. Anyway, long-winded way of saying I really learned what being an operator was when I actually had to implement a recommendation from a consulting firm across a large organization that required new hardware, new software, tons of training, tons of revisions to the product. It was an eye-opener. There was the second part of the question. I missed it. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. It's just trying to understand with young people that are currently working in consulting, how can they sort of start training that muscle or developing that mindset while they're in an advisory role?
Yeah, I think I can just build on what I just said here. Think about when you walk out of the room and you haven't sold the next case, because the next case sometimes isn't implementation, it's a side case. What do they actually have to do with this? Try to keep in touch on what the work was to actually implement what you're talking about. How did that work out? How do they have to change people? Do they have the right people implemented? Is the compensation incentives, do they need to be changed? Are they tracking the new metrics based upon your recommendation? Did they get the ultimate results? Those are all things that you often are in your wake. And I tried to pay attention more and more as to what's in my wake. I just pronounced something at a meeting, but what's in my wake? What the people scrambling? I mean, the best thing you can always do at the end of a meeting says, what resources or help do people need to get this done? Because there's a pride in a Bain kind of thing. I can get this done. I got it covered versus where do you need some help? Like part of this rollout's going to be in China. Do you have a resource in China? No. Let's figure that out. Rather than have that person scramble and be too proud to say, I don't have a resource in China.
That's fantastic. So this next question is a bit of a different type of question. It says, I've heard that as you progress through your career and start earning more, obviously with great financial opportunity also comes major challenges. I think the first thing is we need to validate if that's true with you. And what do different tiers of wealth do to people from what you've seen over your career?
Well, at the risk of being commonsensical, my father grew up in a very, very different generation. When I was growing up, he said, if you can make 30 by 30, 30,000 in income by the time you're 30 years old. I had that in my head growing up. And I passed that when I got my first Bain paycheck, I think, annualized. And so I then just probably like a lot of people, I just sort of focused on what my contribution was going to be to a family. And I defined that as what really mattered to me. And once I got over that, it got to be, okay, I have something more I can do. And I did start finding ways to do things for others. And sometimes to get an ability to influence in things in the philanthropy world, you better make provide money because they really want your money. So I found the things I really wanted to be part of and make some donations to them. And they tend to be oriented towards think tanks and politics. I've had an interest in that, probably going all the way back to working with Mitt. And then I started finding to make more time for things that made a difference that were unpaid. And with example with Mitt, I was in my prime at TPG in my mid 50s, and I left for an entire year. I took a leave of absence, which was a great thing that the partners let me all do it. And I went full time in Mitt Romney's presidential campaign in 2012. And all the way to I was the #2 guy running his transition committee in DC. So I lived in DC from September to November 5th, whereas a lot of you obviously know finishing second is the same as finishing last. But that's actually how I ended up leaving TPG. I had a whole year of doing something totally different. I felt doing a really great cause, and I got much more interested in doing good causes and less about TPG and so forth. I never really have had a full-time job since then. I worked for Meg Whitman part-time for a few years on the restructuring there. I worked with Jesse Rogers, who founded Altamont, for several years. And then I worked with a whole host of companies. And some of them I would say are philanthropic, i.e., I'm working the company because it's a very good idea, but I'm not sure it's going to make money, but it really help the world. I mean, I have another prop here somewhere. Yes. Peter Thiel fellow I backed.
That's
this
great.
kludgy looking box is a box that could be inserted into a movie theater projection office and allow people that are hard of hearing or hard of sight to be hooked to a phone and translate that from that movie theater and real time sync it up. So if you're with grandpa and he's watching Frozen with his grandchildren, but he can't hear it, he can put it through his phone and turn up the volume. It's a brilliant invention.
Incredible.
Ultimately, this guy's so clever, the Peter Thiel guy, he put everything on the phone. So we got rid of the box, figured out a way through a Shazam kind of open source data to actually just download any film and sync it up perfectly. But that's a good example. It was a totally do good thing. Now, through Charter Communications, millions of families can have both captions on a show that normally wouldn't have a caption because no one wants to look at captions. It's just on the phone now, or crank up the volume for grandpa. So those are the things I've done that are much more fun and rewarding. I'm working with an African-American gal in Texas who's building dry bar, which is normally for, I'll say, Caucasian women to blow out their hair.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out African-American have the exact same issue, but it's to straighten the hair. And I think it's a great cause. She pulls this off. She's got 4 profitable stores in Dallas now. If she pulls this off, this could be a massive opportunity for empowerment for Black female executives in health and beauty, which is a great category. So I'm doing some things that are fun, that aren't obvious commercially, but can really make a difference. And that's what really motivates me today. My last one, and I'll stop on this, but the governor of North Dakota got me involved in the Teddy Roosevelt Museum. He's probably one of the greatest modern presidents and the founder of the modern conservation movement, having set aside 250 million acres, more than I think all presidents after him combined. And there's a monument to a museum to him being built in the Badlands of North Dakota. We've raised about $350 million. It should be completed this summer, and it's going to be spectacular for any of you who live in the upper Midwest. So that's the kind of things that I'm more driven to today than I guess I have some peers who stayed at TPG all the way through. They've made a pant load of money. I'm sure they're going to do good things after, but I finished that in my late 50s.
Okay, fantastic. And I know you haven't had a full-time job in a while, so this next question might be a little bit difficult to answer. It's a lot of professionals today are struggling with pivoting mid-career. So perhaps you're a manager or senior manager at Bain, or an EM at McKinsey. What advice would you give to somebody who's considering a bold career change but fears losing the momentum and the rapport they've already built with the firm?
I think the way things are different. I wouldn't live the way I did. If you look back and say, what did I say to my younger self? I would say, don't live for your resume. I was in a mindset, you never leave until you have another job. Because how to explain the resume gap? When I'm interviewing people now, they and I are proud. Hey, what'd you do when you took that year off? I did this. I mean, if you did nothing, that's different. But if you did something really cool, really scratched an itch, and then you got back in the game. So I would not be over caught up with the old rubric of don't leave until you have your next job. Because sometimes that leads you to stay in a job much longer than you want to, and you aren't even doing as good a job as you could. That would be point one. Point two, I mean, I think you have to find something. You have to start with a apologist comes in, something you love. It can't just be the next job where you can make money. I happen to love, let's say, going from Bain to TPG because I took all my skill set there, but applied it in real companies and drove it as an operator. That I just never got that opportunity in TPG and in Bain, but I still got the ADD part. I got to work on a variety of different things, very intellectual stimulating. Most of the things we came into were situations where we had to create value. The company was
Mhm.
priced in a way that we had to create value, which means we had to change the company. So intellectually, it was very powerful for me. But I think you just have to start with something you love and you really want to do that matches your skill set, but not in a way that you aren't going to be stretched. I mean, find something that some of the best hires I make are people who have proven they've done something related, but will have to stretch in the new role, get stretched in the new role. And the last thing I'll say is I think this goes back to the weak links. There are people in your network, like let's say you're thinking of doing something different right now, and then ask yourself, how many people are actually helping me with this? And the answer is, well, no, because I didn't tell anybody. Okay, think about that. Think about how you can have people know that isn't disruptive to your current job, because I'm guessing now the vast majority of jobs today are found through networks. I know my son has a job where they have hundreds of employees, and every time they put out a notice on their website, they get 50 people applying for a CX job. And it just takes one phone call from one friend to say, hey, this guy's really good. All of a sudden, you go from being in the stack of papers to, oh, boom, let's look at Sally.
Mhm.
So I think you find the thoughtful way that more and more people are aware that you want to do something differently. Pay dividends. You'll find things. I mean, I still am doing that kind of thing to find the kind. Many people, thousands of people know the kinds of companies that I'm looking for to invest in and work with,
Mhm.
and then some things just come to me over the transom.
Perfect. And as an extension of that, there's obviously now our world is rapidly changing with AI, so people are finding really interesting opportunities in different industries. You have some of the more proven opportunities in operating or investing, but people are also looking at maybe chief of staff at a healthcare AI company. What's sort of your take on what types of roles should people really be pursuing after consulting?
Again, I could just speak to me. I had sort of a soft landing. PepsiCo had a great track record of hiring senior partners from places like Bain, and you had
Hmm.
18 months to prove you actually were an operator, just hidden as a consultant. And can you make that transition? So that was great. I think chief of staff roles are a great way to learn a business, build the confidence of the CO. But I would probably make sure you're going in with the understanding that, again, if some people say, I love the staff role, I want to go from chief of staff to head of strategic planning to CFO. So that's fine too. But if you're thinking whatever you're thinking the end state is, I wouldn't be shy about having the guy know I'm not going to get ahead of my skis here. I know I got to crush it for the next 2 years, but I'm doing this because I want to be in your organization. And I
Hmm.
don't want it to be a long-term staff role. I want it to be an operating role. And I want to get the opportunity to prove that. I think you have to probably have that kind of conversation. You have to have a conversation about the level of risk you want to take. And in theory, I took two great risks. I went to uh, Bain, which just had one office and 50 employees, but I could tell the people were great. And I thought the macro growth was already proven over the past 7 years. And TPG, again, there were 14 people when I joined, and we had 750 million. When I left, we had 100 billion under management. It was risky that it was small, but it was a category, private equity, that was exploding. And I knew some of the people from Bain were just absolute rock stars, and that carried me. So I think it's hard to bet. I'm so good that whatever macro environment or the quality of the people, I can just take this company to the top. It's more that you find a good macro and you match in with good people. And I just keep in mind, people sort of forget that 90% of the companies you look at do not have the top 10% of the people in the country.
Hmm.
I try to focus on where the people are remarkable. You shake your head. Like when I saw Mitt Romney and spent time with it, I said, wow, I've not met an executive like this before. I want to sort
Hmm.
of I want to hitch my wagon to this train. So I'd pay attention to those changes in that way. But I
Hmm.
think the risk of being wrong is a much lower now. People look at stuff that went sideways, and it's a learning experience. It's not a mistake.
We're just coming up on time here a little bit. Got a couple more questions that I think are interesting from the audience. Somebody had asked, you have sat in rooms where people have decided how billions of dollars get allocated. What separates the great investors from just the capable investors in those conversations?
Uh, certainly in those meetings, it often becomes feels like the loudest voice. I mean, you're arguing. You got four different guys. There's a $500 million check in each one of these deals. We're only going to do one of them. Obviously, everyone does their homework behind the scenes to get people lined up. We also, I often saw people who were very smart about what goes wrong answers. Sometimes people spend too much on why this is great. The better investors say, here's candidly the three things I'm worried about, but what I think we can do to solve those things. So you're really thoughtful about that. Ultimately, I think the best people that I saw had what I'd call a red team mindset. And that'd be another book, actually, if you haven't come across Red Team. It might have another name, but you can find it under Red Team. The Red Team concept, it goes back to the Roman Church and the ability to have a single person next to the Pope called the devil's advocate, who advocated for the devil, i.e. said, this person should never be a saint. Here's the 10 reasons why. The idea is not to say he could be a saint. Here's a couple concerns. So the job of the devil advocate is do not make this person a saint. We put that in at TPG, that we had a couple of people whose sole job was to say, we should not do this deal. The CEO is not the right guy, and we don't have a backup plan. We morphed it into don't say don't do the deal. Say, I'd only do the deal if we have a new CEO. I'd only do the deal if we plan to exit China. I'd only do the deal if we had $250 million to the price, putting it all into advertising because the brand is real broken. So those are the guys or gals, I think, that break through the clutter, that really think through the other side well. Too often, the newer people sort of push, and why is it a great deal? And everyone just thinks about the pattern recognition of, yeah, we've heard these before. They don't always work out. Why is someone selling? Someone is hardly ever selling thinking, boy, they're going to make a shitload of money on us because we're stupid. We're charging too little. The company's perfect. The stuff just comes out of the woodwork all the time on deals. So the person who's better at thinking about what's wrong, not focusing, but thinking what's wrong and thinking about alternatives, sways me on the investment committee that this has been thought through holistically.
Phenomenal. This sort of brings us to the end of the audience Q&A. I have a couple rapid wrap-up questions for you if you're ready to answer. First one,
sure.
What's the best investment you've made, either financial or otherwise?
Of course, I'll say my family, but that's not financial per se. I was the first advisor to Benchmark. This is how old I am. Benchmark Fund got started. I was their first consumer advisor. I put in $50,000, which mattered to me then, sort of matters to me now. They did a deal called eBay pre-IPO. I got 10% of my $50,000 allocated to that. So $5,000, I made $1.5 million. That would have been my best deal ever. However, I didn't find it, although I did find their CEO, Meg Whitman. So I guess, and they gave me some more stock for helping on that process. But everything else pales by comparison. And I've had quite a few others, we have to say, that turned out to be goose eggs. So I'm not Mr. Golden Touch. I've had a few good ones, but that would be the extreme one.
And you know what? Actually, conversely, the next question was going to be, what's the worst investment you've made, financial or otherwise?
In the SNL crisis, we found a small savings and loan that we thought had been battered enough and was appropriately priced, and we bought it very cheaply, and it was worse than we thought, and we lost everything. And it was just I look back now and say, I'm not into timing things, but we thought we'd sort of timed right, that all the punishment had gone through, the regulatory part was going to be better, but the brand was just too damaged. And so I'm probably less inclined to go after the broken companies, but from experience like that, I really go after companies that I'll say are in the good, let's get them to great category, rather than, I just do not have the patience or the risk tolerance to start broken and try to unwind it.
Perfect. And what's a moment that you think about frequently, more than most people would guess?
A moment like in my past or
whether past or present, or even, what's a moment that you might think about in the future that you want your life
I can be very superficial. Well, I think about my boys getting married at some point. That would be nice. And I think about getting a single digit index in my golf game. I think about that. It's not a good use of time, but I'm not thinking about business all the time. I'm thinking about
I wouldn't say it's not a good use of time, but
I will say one last thing for all the younger people here. I worked out aggressively my whole life, stayed in great shape, but I never lifted weights. That was a miss. I just did aerobic stuff.
Mm.
Stretch and lift weights. I'm catching up on it now. I encourage you to do it all throughout your life.
Phenomenal. I think that that advice is definitely well taken, especially when you're working till 10, 11 p.m. most nights. So I think we
There you
definitely have
go.
to make the time to do that. If
I'll say
you're
this last thing: the epilogue. Bain is still a part of my life today, and I've been gone from Bain for 40 years. It comes up every week. The analytical tools, the people, the network, the communication skills, just unbelievable. Now I've literally known almost every one of your CEOs because after Tom Tierney, who I used to live with, Donna, who used to work for me, Ellis used to work for me, and then Manny Mercedes used to work for me. I think he's just stepping down now.
that's
So
right.
I'm beyond it now, but I've stayed connected, and it's been just a treat for my life to see such a great company become so big, be in such demand for workers everywhere. It's an academy company. When you see Bain, you're not just getting Sally Lipschitz, you're getting someone who has a bunch of DNA that's about integrity, about understanding costs, customers, and competition, analytical, persuasive, high integrity. Yeah, all those things come with a package. You just sort of know it. The hurdle getting into Bain and succeeding in Bain is highly respected in all businesses. So feel great about that. Those of you at Bain, if some of you are Bain and McKinsey, BCG, I'll say the same thing. It's a great launch pad, whether you stay 2 years or 10.
Incredible. And this is an extension, but if your name, resume, and bio disappeared from Google, what would you want your family and close friends to remember you for?
The movie. No, I think a simple view would be that that people valued you, and I think it can be broadly speaking, it can be in your family, it could be your community, it could be your vocation or your avocation. But I do have a little bit of a picture of when you're gone, people miss you. I'll tell you when um, Bill Campbell, the coach of coaches, who coached all Google, Facebook, all those companies in the early years, passed away early. And he was early at Apple. He's Steve Jobs' personal coach. 4,000 people showed up for his celebration of life. And it was wild. And people had nothing to gain other than to show respect for a guy who touched them, who they valued. Now, I will say, sidebar, 50 people were there because he wrote into his will that in perpetuity they could drink for free at the bar that he owned in Palo Alto, which is one of my ideas. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to have 50 people at least for my celebration of life. But beyond that, you better do what he did and just touch so many lives in a way. And again, it could be just your family. Boy, if you have your family rocking and rolling by virtue of the investment of time you made, that's game, set, match. The others are gravy. And but I think about all those various pieces, and I try to do that in a good way. The pay it forward thing really works. Something like this. I don't know an ad from Adam, but I'm happy to do this because he seems like a good guy and it's a good cause.
And I have deep appreciation that you decided to take the time to do this. And Dick, this has been incredibly insightful, not only for myself, but for everybody who's listening and everybody who will listen after. I really appreciate how candid you've been. I know a lot of people are going to walk away with a lot of new perspective. There's questions that I asked that that were coming up as you were speaking, because there was so much genuine interest in some of the transformative decisions you've made throughout your career. You've worn many hats: consultant, operator, investor, founder, and today you unpacked it for us in a way that we don't really get. So I'm really grateful for that.